This is Mike Madrid, and you're listening to Red County, Blue County, Orange County, produced by UC Irvine School of Social Ecology. Our story begins with the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. For all of the world's focus on the triumph of American values and the defeat of the Soviet Union, the end of the massive defense spending and military buildup had tremendous financial impact on the California economy. In many ways, what Orange County was going through in the 1990s is precisely what is happening in the rest of the country today. Unprecedented racial and ethnic transformation, the collapse of a white blue-collar workforce, and the rise of a high-tech economy. A new acronym would enter the nation's vocabulary: BRAC. The Base Realignment and Closure Process would redefine the California economy in a way that would lead it into a severe recession and force a reconfiguration of the Golden State's economy. With the disproportionate loss of military bases on the West Coast, an enormous job loss amongst defense contractors and military spending would upend the Southern California economy. Massive employers with names like McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing cut billions of dollars from the local economy, exacerbating the post-Cold War recession into a near depression for Californians. I went back to Jean Pasco, the longtime reporter in Orange County, who we talked to in an earlier episode, to see just how she remembers that time. Jean now resides in Florida, so I contacted her via Zoom. So when the Cold War ends and the wall comes down, 1989, 1990, and recession starts to loom in the early 1990s, California, the whole country, but California specifically, takes the brunt of what was called the Base Realignment and Closure Process, which was the federal process of determining which bases to shut down that we moneyed up with and resourced for the Cold War to protect the West Coast. And many billions of dollars are no longer flowing to the states, and bases are literally shutting down, jobs are leaving. Did you cover that process?
I did. I covered the BRAC process for both Tustin and El Toro, and you're right. That was a momentous time, not only for the military spending not coming in, but defense spending in general, because you had these huge defense industries, Rockwell and McDonnell Douglas and places. We saw a big shift in LA and Orange County with kind of the loss of the engineers. They just went on to do other things and went other places. So the base closures were huge, and particularly with El Toro closing because of the question of whether that would become a commercial airport, or what would happen to that area.
Perhaps nothing symbolized the massive economic transformation more than the closure of El Toro Air Force Base in Tustin. Commissioned in 1943, El Toro was a massive presence in Orange County, employing thousands of workers over its 50-year existence. To offer her perspective is Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez, who served in the House of Representatives from 1997 to 2017. Is it fair to characterize, when it was all kind of Republican Cold War era, El Toro is a big driver of the economy?
Yes.
The defense industrial complexes, McDonnell Douglas and Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Aerospace was big.
And we had the Apollo program. We had a lot of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff. But part of the business community changes with the BRAC process, and they shut down El Toro, and the defense industry contracts. But there were investments that went into high tech and the Genome Project and biotech.
And our companies that had put, you go to Garden Grove. Garden Grove looks like a nothing kind of city. But in there are the most calibrated machinists you've ever seen. There are companies that all they do are make screws that go onto the shuttles and the Apollo program and everything that goes, the satellites and everything. They have to be so precise. We see when something goes wrong and, something blows up, right? These guys went from doing aerospace to doing the screws that go to keep your knee in, or your new hip, or whatever it is, your pacemaker, or whatever it is. So they actually they still do some defense because there's lots of money in defense. And I was on the defense committee, so I brought back a lot of money for defense. Don't get it wrong, But a lot of them also turned over into this whole biotech.
With Reagan leaving office, the Cold War ending, the complexion of the county changing, and the closure of its military bases, it was clear that change was on the way. So much of what had been Orange County's identity was becoming something new. A renewed domestic focus in the country and a generational change was emerging. In 1992, Bill Clinton, the Democratic presidential candidate and the first baby boomer nominated by either major party, would hold a massive Get Out the Vote rally in Orange County, something unfathomable less than 10 years prior.
4 years ago, when I came here and asked you to support me, I had an idea about what I wanted our country to look like as we move into this new century. A very different world. The world I grew up in was dominated by heavy industry and mass production. The world these children will grow up in will be dominated by computers, technology, and information. The world I grew up in had an America that was totally self-contained. We didn't sell much overseas. We didn't buy much from overseas. The Cold War was the most important thing in the fight we were having with the communists. The world these kids will grow up in will be dominated by a global society in which children will actually get on computers and do research in libraries in other countries, in which people will be able to move across the world as easily as they used to go across town, and in which we will have to fight those who will seek to take advantage of that through drug running, organized crime, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism preying on open societies and free people. This is a different world.
Bill Clinton would lose Orange County in 1992, but he would win California, the first Democrat to do so since 1964. And no Republican presidential candidate has carried the state since. Gene.
Do you remember Bill Clinton coming in the 1992 campaign to Orange County?
Yes, he was, he was this candidate. There was a group of 8 Republicans known as the Orange 8, and they were early supporters of Bill Clinton. And that that got a lot of national attention because of, what the heck are all these Republicans doing backing this Democratic governor from Arkansas, right? And so they were, Catherine Thompson and Gus Owen. They were people that were of stature in the county, and so Clinton got a lot of traction from the interest of those folks, but it was really because of his work with the Democratic Leadership Council and the fact that he wanted to work together with Republicans. He was not a hyper-partisan. He was not perceived as hyper-partisan. So there were a lot of folks that were, looking at the writing on the wall and seeing the way things were going with Democratic majorities and just the tide turning that way, and they figured, okay, this is somebody we can work with, and they liked what he had to say because he was not not uber conservative at all, and really had some policies and programs that they felt that they could support, welfare reform, that kind of thing.
In 1996, Latina Democrat Loretta Sanchez began her run to take down the boisterous Congressman B1 Bob Dornan, forever transforming the ethnic representation of OC politics. During my interview with Congresswoman Sanchez, we had a chance to talk about Bob Dornan and how she remembers that time.
Always a pleasure to talk about my favorite subject, Orange County.
I want to take us back first, but then I'm going to ask you a little bit later on about kind of where you see all of this going. but you have such a unique perspective and such a unique role in the at least in the modern era of the transformation of Orange County. Can you set the stage a little bit for us of when you were deciding to run for that congressional seat in that profound year, and what was happening politically in the county, maybe even a little bit with you personally to make that decision, and then we'll get into what happened and where, but just the politics of it.
Well, I grew up here. I grew up here in Orange County. I'm a graduate of Catella High School. Mm-hmm. I'm an Anaheim kid, which means I'm a Disneyland kid. I mean, that's just what you are when you're in Anaheim. And I became an investment banker. I went to Chapman University, just down the street from here. So totally Orange County, right? And I became an investment banker. And it was always interesting to me that I could work almost anywhere in the world, but to break into Orange County was so difficult. And one of the difficulties was that the politics and the leadership of the county, quite frankly, was pretty Republican and pretty Anglo and pretty male and pretty old. I mean, that was really what we had as our leadership here. Right. And anytime that the Orange County Register, and they were our local newspaper, of course, anytime that the Orange County Register would ask people opinions about things, it was always the same guys. It was Peter Muth, who made the cinder blocks for walls. It was Carl Karcher. There was never any woman's voice. And so I was living here, and I came home because I wanted to spend more time with my grandma. She was living with my mother. And I started working locally pro bono for some of the schools I had gone to in Anaheim, and completely changing really the building blocks for our kids to become successful. So I went to the school district and I said, hey, I'd like to put this program, and I can do it for free and raise money and, really help your kids. Well, nobody likes change. So then I asked the mayor at the time, was Tom Daly, a friend that I knew. And I said, gosh. And he said, go and talk to your member of Congress. So I tried to go and talk to Bob Dornan, and he refused to meet with me. And so I went home and I said to my family, I'm going to run for Congress.
Really?
And that's
how it started.
That's really the way it started. So, we're a large family. My parents are immigrants from Mexico. They met here. They had 7 children. They were very involved in community. All of us were very involved in the Anaheim area. So we just started working with our friends and the people we knew. And my mom was a teacher, and the teachers and everything. And we just started, getting together a campaign. And first it had to be the Democrats, because they already had a candidate that they had put up. And so the primary beat them.
Who was that?
And that was Jim Prince.
Okay.
And so then the Democrats were angry at me, because they thought, where'd this woman come from? And she was put up by the Republicans, and, it's just a kind of a false thing. And so they didn't want to help me. And so, we just kept kind of walking door to door. I walked 65,000 houses in over a year's time. And all my brothers and sisters, everybody knew everybody. We knew everybody, So we just worked, and we worked the areas where they didn't know us. And, it came out that, when all was said and done, I won by 984 votes. And everybody was surprised. The Democrats back in Washington, D.C. didn't know who I was. So they didn't know me, and nobody knew me here. And, everybody was surprised except for me. I was like, what, and my family, because we had worked really hard towards it. And that's the way I became a congresswoman.
You ran against a very colorful character in Bob Dornan. And I'm being judicious with my words here. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Bob Dornan was not a very nice guy. Especially not to Democrats, but even to Republicans. For example, there was a Republican who was a gay man that was in the Congress, and Bob Dornan outed him out on the House floor. at a time when being gay wasn't necessarily an easy thing to live with,
Especially as a Republican.
especially as a Republican. So that's the type of thing that Bob Dornan did. He was just not a nice guy, and even to Republicans. And so today we see that almost as acceptable behavior in some of our politicians, right? Where they're screaming at people, where they're outing them for whatever, where they're lying, about them, where they're pointing guns at them, where they're, getting their supporters to go and protest them and spit at them when they're eating dinner at a restaurant with their families. I mean, it's, so Bob Dornan, in some sense, was the beginning of the nastiness. It got then what I call the politics of personal destruction really happened with Newt Gingrich and the takeover of the House in 1994. So 2 years before my election to get to Congress, there was an election, and the Democrats had controlled the House of Representatives for 40 years, and all of a sudden they lost it to Newt Gingrich and the Republicans. And the way they lost it is that Newt Gingrich went personally. He did personal attacks against people. So Bob Dornan did it on a smaller scale individually, but Newt Gingrich did it with a plan. And then it just got more difficult and more difficult for people to be friends on each side, because they were afraid of this whole personal, political, got you kind of a situation.
You become kind of a symbol of a new era and a new time in Orange County.
Well, yes, because I was a woman.
Yeah.
I was young. I mean, I went to the Congress when I was 36, which was very young back there for any woman to be in the Congress. Yeah. I was Hispanic. And I was a Democrat. And, at a time when Orange County had sent 6 Republican white males for as long as they could remember. And so, Democrat, a woman, young, a Hispanic, everybody was like, oh my gosh, what is this about? And we really did. I was able to, because of the power of that position and using it wisely for people, we began to change what was going on in Orange County. There was a different voice. Now there was a voice in the newspaper that wasn't the same old voice of all the guys. Now there was a voice that wasn't the Republican voice necessarily, you see. Now there was a voice that talked about other issues, or how important issues like taxation or war, which are considered men's issues, how they were affecting women and women's families. And so it was just an ability to, one, have a voice that was saying different things, but two, to use the power of that office to empower the people locally so that they became stronger voters, more involved in their communities, and we began also to replace a lot of the local elected officials with Democrats or women or minorities. And mine was the only office of the 6 that, quite honestly, if you were Black, if you were Hispanic, if you were Muslim, we had everybody in our office. Interns weren't just young white males that were Republican. It was really a training ground for so many people.
Jean Pasco, who covered Bob Dornan as a reporter, remembers him well. Jean, tell us about his time in Congress.
And he had come from LA. He was a talk show host in LA. He had Tempo as his talk show in LA in the 60s, and took advantage of kind of redistricting to run for a seat, and the fact that you don't actually need to live in the congressional district that you're running in to run. So and then he kind of took off from there. But the Orange County Republicans really embraced him, because in a way, kind of like Trump, and I don't want to compare the two because they're very different, but Bob would say what he was thinking. he didn't really filter things, and I think a lot of people found that refreshing, because a lot of times when you're dealing with people in government, they have an, kind of an automatic filter that they don't say what they really are thinking, because they tell you what you want to hear. And Bob, that never stopped Bob. I mean, he would just tell you what he was thinking, and so people thought that was very refreshing. But he was big supporter of defense spending in Orange County, big supporter. Those were back in the days of earmarks too, so he was able to bring money for projects and different things back to Orange County. He would work with Democrats in Congress to make sure Orange County got funding, that kind of thing. I think it was Glenn Anderson, when he was in Congress, brought a lot of money back for transportation projects in Orange County. He didn't have to, but Bob was a very bombastic guy, and he would constantly kind of get himself in trouble, but underlying all that, just very likable. And so I think he kind of had that Reagan-esque quality of being very likable while saying some really unlikable things. A lot of people didn't like Reagan's policies either, but they liked the guy.
Would you characterize him as a precursor to not just the performative politics of our current era, but sort of was he in the mold of the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Lauren Boeberts or Matt Gaetz, or was it different?
I think it was different, because at his core, Bob was a gentleman, or thought of himself as a gentleman. I don't think you'd ever see him, decked out in regalia with the MAGA hat and all that. He did see Congress as a serious place, and he felt like he was a serious participant there, even though he would be very colorful when he was back at the district. But I think it was more what he said versus what he did. He didn't really act out.
There was a
in that
respect for the
sense.
institution.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So now walk us through 1996, and he loses sort of shockingly, right? It was a little bit of a surprise to Loretta Sanchez. And Bob was a very outspoken on illegal immigration, at least towards the latter years. Walk us through the campaign, the election, of when you find out that he loses, and what was the environment around it?
Well, actually, Bob was one of the first people to predict that Loretta Sanchez would win, because Bob was a student of the demographics of the district. He got in a lot of trouble for kind of not living there. I mean, he had a house in Garden Grove, but then he had the place out in Virginia with the Grotto. He got in a lot of trouble for that, with bouncing the house checks and that kind of thing. But he would keep in touch with what was going on, at least demographically and voter registration wise, in the district. And I think he saw that not only was there were demographic changes that would favor not only a Latino candidate, but a Latina candidate. And I don't know how much he was paying attention to how Loretta was campaigning, but I clearly recall him earlier on, because there had been a gentleman, Eric Prince, who had been running, that everybody was paying a lot of attention to, and he was not focused at all on him. He was focused on Loretta, and he was a little worried about it, because he thought, okay, things are changing. And he also acknowledged that he really hadn't been there in the district. He had run for president. I think he got 2% of the vote or something. I mean, he hadn't spent a lot of time lately, whereas she was everywhere and doing a lot of events and things. And I think he felt like, okay, this is somebody that I need to be worried about. And it turned out to be, absolutely correct. And he attacked her. He was not a gentleman when it came to the campaign literature. He attacked her for, using the Sanchez last name, whereas she hadn't used it when she ran for council in Anaheim. And, he accused her of a lot of things. Republican politics has always been pretty vicious, when it comes to intramural. So, but he definitely, I don't believe he was surprised when the final vote came in. I think he realized, okay, not only did I not pay attention to the district this time like I had before, but the demographics were changing. He had been there a long time. And as I said, he was head of national term limits for a while. And there was just a sense there's just kind of a sense at some point it's time for a change. It's just, kind of swells up. And I think people think, okay, you've been there long enough. I'm now looking to see if someone else can come in and do a better job.
And so he doesn't walk away gracefully.
No.
Right. Can you talk about that? How he challenges it and what those dynamics were?
Well, he was also keeping track of what Republicans were, the issues that they were most interested in. That was a time when illegal immigration was huge in California, and so he focused in on quote unquote illegal voters. And here there's a lot of echoes between then and now, with allegations that there were hundreds and thousands of non-residents voting illegally. And he focused in on a group that was Hermandad Mexicana Nacional in Santa Ana, run by Nativo Lopez, and he would blister and go after Nativo because his name was Larry. It was Larry Lopez that he used for the longest time, and then he changed his name. So he goes after Nativo and his group by saying that Nativo was encouraging non-residents to vote. And it was a huge thing. And Bob, because of his standing in DC, was able to actually get a congressional hearing to convene in Orange County in Santa Ana at the then Hall of Administration to come in and investigate the alleged illegal voting. And I mean, we can talk about it a little more if you want, but the bottom line was that it ended up being, I don't know, several dozen people that voted improperly, but it's because they had been told that you're getting your citizenship, and here's a ballot. There was nothing malicious on their part. I mean, I think it was fewer than 1,000, as I'm remembering, and there were, she had won by a significant amount, and it didn't make a difference. It didn't change the results at all. But he made a huge deal out of it, and there kind of was no there, like kind of like the allegations that surfaced about the 2020 election, where all these dead people voted, everything. I mean, this congressional hearing kind of took testimony on all that stuff, and just ended up that it wasn't enough people to make a difference. They truly thought they were doing the right thing, that they were doing their civic duty. And it was really unfortunate because a lot of those folks got identified as not being residents and having voted. And there were deportation proceedings and all other things that, that happened downstream that were really just so unfortunate. You have folks that really wanted to be part of the American experience, and they got stung.
Here's Dave Wasserman, political analyst, who remembers Bob Dornan and what his shocking loss against Loretta Sanchez meant for Orange County politics.
One of the most fascinating characters that I watched back in 1995 and 1996 when I was getting into this was B1 Bob Dornan from Orange County. Here's this Republican who was ranting and raving with the best of them. I mean, some of the people that I looked forward to watching most were Jim Traficant from Ohio,
Wow.
this raving white-haired guy from Vermont named Bernard. I kind of forget his name, and then Bob Dornan. And when he lost in 1996 to Loretta Sanchez, that was a real seminal moment. It was a huge breakthrough, especially for Latino voters in Orange County. It was kind of their beachhead of political representation. And it's been fascinating to watch the changes since then.
Can you talk a little bit more about, if you're able to, go what that transformation meant? Obviously, it was a significant moment in Latino politics, but to have somebody as rock-ribbed Republican and conservative as B1 Bob to lose to a Hispanic woman, it's pretty significant shift politically in a congressional district.
Right. And back then, Orange County was one of the most Republican bastions in the country. There were Democrats who represented rural Alabama and Mississippi, but Democrats could not break through in the Orange County suburbs. And their one pocket of strength was kind of in the middle of the county, where you had this growing Latino electorate that was just coming into its own and didn't really have, representation at the congressional level. And turnout in that district was typically abysmal. And so even if the Latino share of population in that seat was approaching 50%, the electorate was routinely more than 60 or 70% white. So it was a real moment when Loretta Sanchez broke through. And I think it took someone as controversial as Dornan to move the seat into the Democratic column. If it were someone who had better relationships with non-white voters, let's say an Ed Royce, then that seat probably wouldn't have fallen into Democratic hands as quickly as it did. And over the course of time, the population changed such that Central Orange County now warrants a Voting Rights Act district for Latino voters, but that was not always the case.
With the decline of blue-collar jobs and more high-tech jobs coming to the area, the economy was changing. It was the era of Bill Clinton, a young Democrat who could feel your pain. And the county was now poised to rival geographic tech giants like Seattle and Silicon Valley. But what would all of that mean for Orange County politics? We'll explore the rise of tech amongst the citrus groves next time on Red County, Blue County, Orange County. You've been listening to Red County, Blue County, Orange County, a podcast series produced by UC Irvine's School of Social Ecology. Thanks to all of our guests for appearing on this podcast to help us dissect what makes Orange County so unique. I'm Mike Madrid, and I invite you to subscribe to this podcast and check out our series at sites, sites.uci.edu/Orange County.